First off, we're going to assemble the landing gear. We have two of the struts, which are white moulded plastic. Bit of a naff arrangement here with a ball link and a bolt. I presume that's for the aerial, but these days are 2.4. That's probably not necessary to include as a standard. We've got a we've got a CF plate that goes at the front. We've got our skid blanking plugs, and we've got a little bag of M3 bolts, which we use to bolt the whole arrangement on. First off, we take our carbon plate, pop it on the front two holes in this get secured onto the alloy block there, with a couple of M3 by 16 bolts with some washers on, and blue Loctite those in, so we'll do that now. The back landing gear just bolts straight on, no carbon plate this time, bolts on similarly onto these alloy blocks at the back. We had a bit of a debate which way round they go, but I think actually if you look at these struts critically, they're a little bit sort of swept in either way, so I don't think it matters unless you want to have this aerial holder on the left hand side, which is customary. Now we're going to make some assumptions here. People who are building this have done a few builds before. We're going to assume that you degrease. I've got a little tray of acetone there, that you degrease all the bolts and that you use blue Loctite. I usually just like to put a thread or two of blue Loctite through, so we'll assume that all parts are blue Loctite that go into metal, unless I use green Loctite, I'll tell you, and that metal going into plastic bits will use CA and not thread lock on. You can see these gears are pretty soundly attached there with the four M3 by 12mm self-tapping screws. No, M3 by 16mm with washers. They're very solid. They're quite solid struts. The finish on them is just a little bit shabby and does sort of pick up dirt quite easily. They're about the same size as T-Rex 600 or 700 struts. The skids are a bit thinner. These are only 8mm, and we found that there's a very tight fit, really unacceptably tight fit with the skids and these gear, and I've had to rub them down, polish them up with some 280 wet and dry, and actually put a bit of grease down there. Measuring with the verniers, they seem okay, but there's probably about a 0.1mm of an interference fit, and it's proving a little bit of a chore to get these mounted in. So that's our gears on there. Nice kinky curve at the front, and we're going to pop our set screws in here now, but believe me, these are so damn tight, nothing than a direct hit than a Zeppelin raid is going to shift those. Next we'll get on and put some of the tail components together. So this is step 2 in the manual for tail, and you're going to need the bits out of step 2, so we'll get those out and arrange them now. Obviously you want to make sure all the nuts and bolts in the frame are properly secure. So go over all the M3 bolts now and just check their integrity. They all seem to be tight and Loctited in. Some of these self-tappers, the Phillips headed self-tappers into the plastic components, are a bit loose, so tweak them up. The tail mounting bolts keep loose for now, obviously before the boom's mounted, and the bottom bolts on the engine mountings are loose, so we'll keep those loose as well. This is the pre-assembled tail unit. Comes with a belt. The belt looks very good quality indeed. The tail casing is nice. The big tail pulley there, not going to strip in a hurry. I like these roller bearing idler pulley here. That's pretty substantial. Plastic ones tend to chew up pretty easily. The whole thing, there's no pinch bolt on here. The tail boom is located using these two M2.5 bolts. It's pretty free. It's not entirely loose. I'm sure that'll bed in with wear pretty quickly. It's got a few unusual features here. It's a bit like the old-fashioned MA double yoke onto the slider down here, which I suppose gives a little bit more security than a single yoke slider on that. The blade grips are two-piece. They look like they're moulded high-density plastic, a bit reminiscent of Hirobo grips, and they're held together by these M2 bolts here, and they're secured by what look like M3 nuts, nylock nuts on the end of the bolts. There's probably a hub in there. Well, certainly, I don't think I'm going to break the whole tail down because it looks okay to me, but I'm certainly going to take the tail rotor off and check out what the bearings are in there. This is the tail grips broken down. There's two shells there held together by two M2 by 10mm bolts. This is all satisfactorily put together. There's two radial bearings. There's a 4mm shaft. These are owned by 9mm OD. This is a 2.5mm thickness, and this one looks like it's a 4mm thickness. So 9 by 4 by 4 and 9 by 4 by 2.5 radial bearings. They're already assembled with a thrust washer in the middle there, which will obviously be 9 by 4 thrust washer as well. This is all well greased and set up, so it doesn't need any further assembly. This is the same sort of principle as the MA hub, in that you can adjust this. You'd have to break the hub down. There's no way you can actually get a nut driver, not that I can figure out, down between these blade grips. You see, it's way too big. But you could take the blade grips off and tweak down this nut for adjustment a little bit if you're worried about how much end play there is. And that's a nice assembly actually. You can't fault the design of that. Standard 2 radial, 1 thrust bearing grip on there. No end play to think of, and it's very nice and movable. There isn't even an exploded diagram in the parts or the manual on that, so I thought you'd be interested to see what was inside. As for the rest of the boom, it's all pretty straightforward. You've got your rudder servo brackets here to be mounted. We've got an absolute bucket full of tail pushrod guides here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those. So then slid all those on. We've got our horizontal stabilizer with a 1 round clamp and 1 flat face clamp held in with some M3.5 bolt, and we've got some nylock bolts securing on the stabilizer clamps. So we're going to put the tail boom case on there now, draw down the belt and shove that up the back end of the heli. Now I have to say that the exploded picture of the tail and tail fin mounting isn't very clear. Tom from Compass says he'll get that redone, and it's not very easy to see how the vertical stabilizer and tail bolt are mounted. Essentially, forget the pre-drilled holes in the boom. These basically aren't used for anything whatsoever. You don't need to use any. To mount the tail case on, orientate the boom so that the Compass logos basically are roundabout equal on each side, and it's not quite the 3 and 9 o'clock position, it's just a little bit above that, but anyway, get the centre black bit sort of level. And then basically you need to push the tail case all the way down and make sure it's firmly feeted. It's very important not to have any free play in it at all. It's got to be firmly seated home, which is around about 11 or 12 millimeters. Now the problem then comes that there seems to have been a shortfall in the drilling process for the vertical fin, because our vertical stabilizer is mounted partially on this conventional clamping system here, and that takes the 2 holes at the back, but there's supposed to be a 3rd hole in the back here in the fin where the 2.5 screw can then screw into the tail here and then indent or the boom, or it might perforate it, but it doesn't go into a pre-drilled hole there basically. So we've got to go off here now, and we've got to drill a 3rd, probably 3mm hole down here to take the M2.5 bolt. It's not a big deal to do, just sort of halfway in the middle of this vertical limb of carbon fibre here, halfway equidistant between these 2 mounting holes here. So we'll go and do that now. I've drilled a pilot's hole
and then a 7/64 bit I used, or you can use a 2.5mm drill bit if you prefer, and that then enables the fin to slide over, line up, and then we can put our M2.5mm screw down here, locked tight. And I actually found from past experience these perforate the boom very neatly, so I think it's going to be a bit of a fine call whether or not you screw in this tight enough to compress the boom, or whether you actually drill a little hole in. It's not going to impinge on the belt because the belt's running top and bottom, so I think it's probably just as well to do this up fully rather than just rely on it indenting the boom. So I'm going to do these in fully up, blue Loctited. But just make sure that the boom is pushed fully home and orientated correctly with the logo before you do that. And that's our finely mounted tail with a third M2.5 by 6mm bolt at the back, and also secured with one back here. As I say, the instructions do recommend you to just tighten this down until you feel it's tight and indenting the boom, but I found that they pre-drilled a nice neat little hole if you just screwed it up to the hub, and it looked a bit untidy sticking out, and I don't think it's going to foul the tail belt. So what I've done is I've tightened these bolts up fully home, but the instructions do say tighten them up until they're taut and leave them a little bit proud so they indent rather than perforate the boom.
The tail strut go into these moulded metal ends. Make sure they go around at right angles. Now they're an impossibly tight fit, so you have to sand down these. I put them actually in a drill and sanded it down in a block for a couple of minutes. I reckon you've probably got to take about 0.2 off the end here, which you need to do anyway if you're epoxying to allow the glue to creep into the fibres. So epoxy these on at right angles and make sure you push them fully home so that the air vent there is basically occluded. And this is Joe, who wants to be on the video as well. This is a heli widow here. In fact, this are two heli widows and a dog. The dog's the one in the front.